Welcome to another episode of Women en la Frontera. My name is Brenda Nettles Riojas. On this episode, I am joined by Estela Soza Garza of McAllen, who for 40 years as a social worker provided services to families in different settings, including mental health support to residents in nursing homes. She is the 8th of 13 children and was widowed after 32 years of marriage. Thank you so much for joining us, Estela.
You're welcome, and thank you for inviting me.
It's been a real pleasure to have some conversations about our elders, which kind of inspired this episode on caring for our elders. We've both been talking about this wonderful quote, a reference that the Holy Father has made, how the elders are the treasures of the church and family life. They truly are treasures.
Mm-hmm. They have so much wisdom, so much life experiences, that if we took time to ask them to share, we would learn so much from them.
I know. I mean, we both have different experiences with elders in our lives that really do give us life. And there, again, so much to learn from. But you brought an interesting point in that we need to first kind of go back to, well, who are our elders?
Right.
Is there like a defining moment or a line, is it when you become a grandparent? Because recently I became a grandmother this year, but I don't consider myself an elder. The Holy Father in 2021 initiated a day for the grandparents and the elderly. Mm-hmm. So he's like lumped us both in, and at 56, well, and I'm a grandparent, does that make me an elder?
Well, that's what's interesting, that in terms of if you ask people who is an older adult, who is an elder, they will have different definitions. Initially, 65 was kind of like the magical year because Social Security is what defined that age as when you could get Social Security benefits. But that has changed. People can get Social Security benefits even younger now. And so if you ask people, like for instance, the baby boomers, which is a large population that is now aging out, they do not consider 65 as being old. Their thinking is it's around 73 because older adults are active. They still are engaged in various activities. And, so to them, they don't feel old. If you ask younger people, it's basically what you just said, that they think, do they have gray hair? Are they grandparents? Do they walk slower? So the definition is real interesting as to what would be considered an older adult. And in some, like AARP now is getting at 55. And so, again, the definition varies. So what we're going to be looking at is thinking of the people who would be at least over 60 for this conversation.
Okay. And again, they have different circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Right. And again, we need to remember every person is an individual, which means that everyone has their own capacity and capabilities. So just because someone is over 60 doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be the stereotypical older person. But what we do need to know, Brenda, is that the population is growing. And just for you to know, at the beginning of the 20th century, in the 1900s, 1 out of 25 were 65 or older. Now it's 1 in 8 that are considered older. And in 2050, it's expected to be 1 in 5.
Oh, my.
And so how did we get there? Because, again, of the baby boomers. After World War II, when there were so many childbirths, now those individuals are aging. And so we begin to see the numbers growing. Just for your information, here in the diocese, we have about 114,000 older adults that we need to keep in mind as we hold this conversation.
That's amazing. Mm-hmm. It truly is. And again, each with different circumstances.
Right.
Some who are independent and still very active, and others who require more care
Right.
and attention.
Right. And we need to look at that because many times, especially when people become widowed, especially women, children may begin to be concerned about their safety and their care. But if you talk to people, they want to age in place, meaning that they want to stay at home. They want to be independent. They want to continue to be active. So our role is individual, whether we're family members or community members, we need to encourage that. We need to provide some safety nets for them so that they can stay at home. Think about it. Most of us feel the most comfortable in our own home, sleeping in our own beds, eating when we feel like we're hungry and not when someone is dictating a time. And so the more we can stay as normal in our lifestyle as we can, the better it is for everyone.
That's a great point that you make, to encourage that independence and providing those safety nets. And that may be different for different people.
Right, right. If you want to, I would like to jump into what are some things that we can
Please do.
Okay.
Yes.
Like, for instance, at home, when we begin to see that the older person is needing more support, we may need to do an assessment of the home. Is it safe? We may need to make sure that there's maybe a ramp instead of stairs to go into the home, because if it comes time for a need for a walker or a wheelchair, we need to have accessibility. We also need to make sure that there's non-skid rugs in the most traveled parts where there is space. The doors may need to be wide enough, again, to accommodate a wheelchair. The most important area is in the bathroom, Brenda. We need to make sure there are grab bars, that there's also space where some bathrooms are modified to the point where you can actually bring the wheelchair into the shower. Just the more convenient it is for the person. It doesn't mean that they need someone to take them. That's just to be sure that there's safety for that individual. There are so many things. The perfect person to contact for a home assessment are occupational therapists.
Okay.
Occupational therapists can go in and they measure and they'll tell you this may need to be modified for this, and they'll give you a whole slew of suggestions. And some of those, I believe, and I really recommend that people take time to look at that way before they're needed. Because some may be just cosmetic type of changes. Others may take more financial need in terms of to make sure that it's done. So I believe that it's really important that that be looked at way before it's needed. How do we know if it's needed? If the person is still out there exercising, running, or whatever, they may not necessarily need it, but we don't know what will happen if an accident occurs or whatever. So anything that can be done to ensure their safety, we need to explore that.
Right. I think that we're all headed in that direction.
Yes.
So we all need to start looking at our own homes.
Yes.
And seeing, what are the circumstances.
The lighting, Brenda, both inside and outside is important. There's lights that are real good also inside, where it's, what are they, motion?
Oh, motion detectors.
Yes, those are real good so that people can be able to see as they're walking around their own homes. And of course, outside as well.
Right. In your 40 years of experience, what are some other challenges that you've encountered with families and their elders?
When it comes time, okay, so we want to encourage them to live independently, to help them make sure they're safe, but there may come a time, Brenda, when they may need to have more supervision. And some people are able to hire someone to come in and help, but that takes a toll on families. So sometimes families are willing to take a loved one into their home. But there's also preparation that needs to take place. Just as we need to modify when it's their own home, we may need to modify our own home when we bring our loved ones in. But aside from that, you're familiar with those, what are they called, Brenda? Those crib mobiles you know, that you would put for a child to see little animal characters that the baby's lying down. Hey, when you pick up one of those crib mobile characters, what happens to the mobile?
Oh, yeah, it offsets.
Yes, it kind of goes off, right? That's the same. If you look at the family as that crib mobile, that's a system. If something changes, either as someone comes in or if someone leaves, it's going to go kind of off balance. Systems need what is called homeostasis or balance. When there's not a balance, then there becomes a lot of tension. So the same is true when you're bringing someone into the home. Think about when you brought your baby home. There's modifications that needed to take place, the times that you can sleep or not, eating it. The same is true when it's an older adult coming in, because they have their schedule. They're used to their routine. How are you going to accommodate all of that? So there has to be very long conversations. And I don't mean 8-hour one in one sitting, but just be able to find out what do we need to do to make it more comfortable for all of us. It's not just for the person who's coming in, your loved ones, but for the family members that are there. We want to make it as comfortable as possible. So again, not just physically, but emotionally. And we also need to look at financially, because it's another expense. Bringing someone in, there may be some medicines or some equipment or supplies that are needed, but that are not covered by whatever insurance or Medicare they have. So that may come out of the person's pocket, the caregiver in this case, the adult child. So that's an issue. Again, some modifications may need more money than anticipated. That's a financial. So financial strain can be an issue that can come up. So again, prevention, just as we talk about our own health, we try and prevent problems to get worse than they need to be. The same is true for our family system, which is so important, so important. The other is, what are the community resources? Just as we need to have community resources for the older adult who stays at home, we need community resources when they come into our home. And a lot of people don't realize that they can qualify. They can qualify for Meals on Wheels. They can qualify for going out to the adult daycare centers. And the adult daycare centers can provide the transportation to actually go and pick them up. And they feed them their lunch there in the daycare centers. They're engaged socially with others. They have crafts. They have different activities like dancing. If the older adult loves dancing, my dad loved dancing. He loved dancing. He didn't have to drink to dance. He always danced. So for him, that was a fun part of the day when they had music and dancing at the adult daycare center. They have activities like bingo and all this. And they also take them out to the community, because we don't want people to be isolated. And when people become more frail and not really independent, that may be kind of like a tip of exploring other home care arrangements, because isolation is one of the main problems when older people live alone. We don't want anyone to be socially isolated. So there's a lot of community resources. The elder care, there's eldercare.gov, but you can look up for elder care, and it'll give you a lot of resources that are available to older adults for support, for care. And it's, again, also available for adults who live with their family members. People think you have to live alone for those programs. Not always, not necessarily. And so that can free up some of the financial strain. Go for it.
That's good to hear. That's very helpful to hear. I mean, as you know, my 90-year-old mother-in-law is living with us, and it's been a real gift and joy. But it also comes with its challenges.
Yes.
And as you described, the family systems, you need to find that balance within the systems, because anytime something changes, as you mentioned, it impacts the whole system.
Yes, it does.
And,
And
we have found our way through that.
And it changes because let's say someone gets sick in that system, it's gonna, again, that mobile is gonna go off whack. So if we look at it in that context, I think it makes more sense that the system is going to try and always be in balance. And it can be in balance for a long time. I don't want people to think, oh, we're always going to be. No,
that's just life. Lydia Facina has been on our program before. And she's oversees the family life office. And she always says, life is messy. Family life is messy. And I think your description of the family systems and that balance.
That's so important.
It's an ongoing, an ongoing effort and almost like a dance.
Yes. But once you find the steps, isn't it beautiful?
Absolutely.
And fun?
Yes.
And fun. Yes. So that is really, truly important. The other is I really want to emphasize the issue of isolation.
I think that's a very important issue because I feel that and I've seen it with the elders in my life, that when they are engaged and stimulated, they thrive. As opposed to isolation can lead to, I mean, you've seen
depression. You know that there's a high rate of death by suicide among the older adults, and it's understandable. We're not saying it's right, but you know, if we are aware of it, we can prevent it. And that's why I always encourage going to those adult daycare centers to get them out, or bringing in providers. There's also providers who come in. Again, just allowing some interaction with others is really, really crucial, whether they're living at home alone in their own home or with a family member, because family members need to go work. You know, we also have our own financial responsibilities, and so life has to continue. So the issue of isolation has to always be kept in mind.
Particularly, as you said, for those who live alone, or even those who may live in our homes, finding that opportunity for engagement in activities, because I know, for example, I work all day. My mother-in-law is home, and she gets bored. She's got her routine, but I think more activities would be beneficial. Yes,
it is. So again, looking for community resources is very important. And agencies here in the Valley, we have the Rio Grande Valley Area Agency on Aging, and that's who kind of looks at the Meals on Wheels and all the activities like Amigos del Valle, where they will actually take the food to the adult daycare center so they can eat there. And so be familiar with all of those programs for everybody. English or Spanish, the services are there for you. So we need to take advantage of them.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that the Holy Father has made such a concentrated effort to talk about our elders and our grandparents in our lives, los abuelos, who bring so much wisdom. And I mean, he was very poignant in saying it's the wisdom of our grandparents. It's an inheritance that we need to make sure that we embrace.
Can you imagine the stories we can hear and learn from them about our families? And we don't need Ancestry.com. We have them right there in front of us.
Right.
You know, we have them. We need to take advantage of their experience. When I worked at in the nursing home, I'll never forget this woman. I want to say she was 95, 96. And she would talk about Pancho Villa. To me, it was like, what?
It's almost like a storybook.
Yes, de allá de Starr County. And she would talk about those kind of stories. And I just find it fascinating that they've lived it. It's not like I'm reading from a book. I'm hearing it from the person who has shared their life experience. And so having that person in your home can also be an opportunity to learn about your history, your family's history. And I mean, so much they can teach us. So
absolutely.
Much.
In fact, I have a notebook now. And so periodically I will ask my mother-in-law questions. I mean, even like, do you remember what elementary school was like? And what was your neighborhood like in Corpus Christi? And, you know, when did you meet your husband? And because these are treasured moments of her life that are a part of, my husband's, my grandchildren. I mean, and it's important to note them. And I like too that the Holy Father makes a lot of his messages directly to elders, reminding them that they have a very valuable part in our lives. And I like that old age is a vocation. It is not yet time to pull in the oars. This period of life is different from those before, there is no doubt. We even have to somewhat invent it ourselves because our societies are not ready spiritually and morally to appreciate the true value of this stage of life. And it really is a valuable point to learn from our elders and to hear those stories.
Yes. And Brenda, it's important for us as a church, as the Catholic Church, to be aware of this, because society is more about the youth versus the older. Society is more about independence versus interdependence. You see, when we are going to be taking care of our older adults, there's an interdependence that occurs. We can become dependent on them and they can become dependent on us in terms of how we learn from each other, how we can help each other make it through life. Because as we all know, life is not easy. And so that interdependence is I believe, the way that we can really gain from having older adults around us. And we're going against the grain of society by doing this, because we're saying they're as important as a young adult.
Yes. There are prayer warriors. I mean, I know that my mother-in-law, she prays her rosary 3 times a day. She has all her children and her grandchildren in those prayers, and that's powerful.
Yes.
That is I liked, there was a letter to the grandparents that the Holy Father said. He goes, "Dear grandparents, dear elderly, let us follow in the footsteps of these extraordinary elders. Let us too become like poets of prayer. Let us develop a taste for finding our own words. Let us once again grasp those which teach us the word of God. The prayer of grandparents and of the elderly is a great gift for the church." And Bishop Flores has mentioned it often about las oraciones de una abuela son máximo.
Muy fuerte. Llegan más pronto a Dios que uno.
Exacto.
I was going to say, when you talk about that, I like that the Pope also mentioned that the elderly teach us to persevere in faith. I think that is so powerful. How can we persevere in faith? That's the only way that it can take us from the one day to the next day but the teaching that they give us of prayer life is so
and that
crucial.
Perseverance, because they've had some struggles in life.
Oh yes.
You mentioned, and you yourself are widowed, so you are living through that and persevering. And that's an example for your nephews, your nieces, and for others, and the different other struggles that our elders have lived, and always trusting in the Lord to guide them through.
One of the things that I want to make sure that we also talk about is the issue. How can I address this? The issue of the communication. How, again, because it's going to be generational differences in terms of, like, let's say your children, you, and then your mother-in-law that's with you. There's going to be different styles of communicating, and the different changes of the roles that people take. And so that communication needs to be very much an important component in the changing of that family system. So important. My oldest sister is now bedridden, and so my younger sister and I help her once a week to help with her care and everything. And her grandson comes in, and he wants a tattoo. And so, of course, my sister and I are like, "No, you can't do that." You cannot do that. And he's like, Tia, it's a different generation. It doesn't matter what you're going to do when you go get a job. It's okay. Our work allows it. I said, because he works, not, I won't say where, but he works like at a grocery place. And then I said, but how about when you want to go to a professional job? Is that going to be allowed? And so, so we're talking to him. But that's just an example of how we think of different things in different ways. And is it right or wrong? It's generational issues. And so we need to be aware of that. And your mother-in-law may say, who are you? Or she may tell your grandchild, her grandchild, ¿Quién eres tú, mocosa, para decirme? Things like that may come up. And so sometimes the mom is going to want to defend her child. And so this can come across very innocently, but can create rifts because, again, the communication issue, that's really important.
Right. And then, as you talk about communication, there's communication within the household, but even within the family, extended families. Unit, may not be there to see the day-to-day.
Yes.
I find that that's been a challenge.
And so it's easy for them to, being outside, to say, well, I think it's best if you do it this way. Well, no. But one of the things I always told families, in order to get a day or two off on the weekend, if there's siblings around, they need to be responsible for helping in the care of their mom or their dad. It's crucial. It's crucial because if the person who's a caregiver is going to get too tired and could even get sick, who's going to pick up the slack? It's prevention. Everything we do, we're trying to prevent so we can have a long, happier life together. But in reality, your husband is not more of a son as his sisters are daughters. So why would there be a difference? So those are some of the communication that also needs to take place with all family members.
Some very good points. I think we could go on. And just as the Holy Father has had several catechesis sessions or talks on the topic of old age, I hope that we can continue our conversation on a future episode of it. But before we depart, I know that there's a prayer that you want to share.
Yes.
And even before you get to that, is there any other tips? You've given us a lot, but maybe some.
Well, one of the areas I want to pick up on what you were saying about your journaling. When we're talking about books, there's a book that talks about, it's called Tell Me Your Life Story, and it's you fill in the blank, mom, dad, grandparents. And it's a manual, and it'll guide you to find out information about your older adult that you're caring for. And it's a guide, and it gives questions. It allows for them to tell their stories that you can write them in. And once that person is no longer with us, that can become a real family heirloom. And so it's actually a book. I used to work with adoption of special needs children, older children that were removed because of abuse and neglect. And we had what we call life books, where we would help them understand their life in terms of, because many of them have gone through so many homes. And so we do those life books. To me, when I saw this, it reminded me of that. It's a guide, but you could do in any way. If you're into crafts, you can come up with your own way of keeping a record of the stories of what it is your older adult can share with you all. I think that'd be real good.
It's a great opportunity to spend time together and engage with the family member.
Yes, and it gives the time to allow the reminiscing. Reminiscing is something really important for older adults. It's a life review. You know how they say, pues siempre habla de lo mismo. They're always wanting to share the same story. that's how they see how important they were in life. That's how they see what achievements they may have had. So reminiscing is important. It's a very important task for older adults. This manual or any other that you can come up with will help you do that. Give them the opportunity to do that. And then I had 2 other books. We can post them.
Oh, no, please mention them.
The second one is called The Caregiving Season, Finding Grace to Honor Your Aging Parents. It's from this year. It's by Jane Daly. And it's allowing advice, encouragement, and hope for the caregivers. And the third one that's real critical, I believe, having worked with so many families, is the Family Caregiver's Manual by David Levy. David Levy is an attorney. And this is touching on the issue of preparing for what all of us are going to experience, which is death, and making sure that that everything that's required legally is in place before that act actually happens. And one of the reasons that the family system may need to really work on the emotional aspect is because we always have that anticipated grief. We're always fearful of our parent dying on us. And that's going to happen. Death is a reality in life. And so, but it doesn't mean that it's easy or that we want to experience it, but it is there. And so this book will give a legal kind of like a roadmap to make sure that everything's in place. And so I think those 3 are good to help the person, the older adult, to help the caregiver, and to make sure that everything's in place legally before we actually lose our loved ones.
Excellent advice. I have lost my mother and my father, and there's so much I wish I had said or done, and and we know we are all pilgrims passing, and this is just part of the journey. But while we are here, we do need to celebrate our elders at every moment possible, because we don't know what tomorrow will bring.
Right.
We have right now. So right now, if you haven't called your mother, if you haven't called your father or your elder, tia or tío, or even your neighbor, take a time this week to reach out to an elder in your community. We again, because we can't count our tomorrows. We only know right now.
That's true.
Is what we have.
And they have so much pearls of wisdom that we can gain, that we can also benefit from it as well. And again, the Pope talks about caring for the older adults, which means visiting or calling. It's an opportunity for a blessing, for blessings. And it's true.
Absolutely.
It's true.
Well, like I said, so much more to cover. On my Frontera tip, you mentioned your 3 books. I do recommend the Holy Father's Catechesis that's available on the Vatican website. And it begins, I think his first catechesis was February 23rd, 2022, but we'll provide a link on our show notes.
Okay.
But I think...
Can I say the prayer before we end?
Please. So we'll end with the beautiful prayer that you have.
Okay. It's called Be at Peace. Do not look forward in fear to the changing life. Rather, look to them with full hope as they arise. God, whose very own you are, will lead you safely through all things, and when you cannot stand, God will carry you in his arms. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Estela.
You're welcome. Enjoyed it.
Thank you, Estela. It's been a real pleasure to talk about this very important topic. And we also thank all of our listeners today for joining us on Women in La Frontera. Until next time, let us go into the world and use the gifts God has given us to set the world on fire with God's love and grace.
Amen.